350 guests watched my daughter introduce a complete stranger as her father. My name is Jim Hayes, and I just finished paying $500,000 for her wedding. Picture this, your own daughter telling an entire ballroom that you're dead while hugging another man she calls Daddy. Meanwhile, every vendor, every flower arrangement, every piece of crystal funded by the bank account of the dead father sitting alone at table 18. But here's what Victoria didn't know when she erased me from her story. Every contract had my signature. Every payment came from my company. And I was holding the final check for $340,000 that would keep her perfect reception running. 26 years of raising her. 6 months of planning her dream wedding. One moment of complete betrayal that changed everything. What happened next shocked even me, and it definitely wasn't what those Greenwich socialites expected from a simple plumber in a borrowed tuxedo. Before I tell you how this story ends, I have to ask, have you ever been invisible in a room full of people celebrating something you made possible? If this story hits home, hit that subscribe button. I post real stories about everyday justice, and I'd love to know where you're watching from. Because tonight, my daughter learned that some bills come due in ways you never see coming. The Ashford Estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, Saturday, June 15th, 2024, 4:30 in the afternoon. I pulled my 2019 Ford F-150 into the valet line behind a parade of Bentleys and Mercedes. The valet, kid couldn't have been more than 20, looked at my truck like I'd brought a dead fish to dinner. But he took my keys anyway. Professional courtesy, I guess. My rental tuxedo from Men's Warehouse felt like a costume, $89 for the day. Meanwhile, every other man here wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I could tell by the way the fabric moved. You don't build a business for 30 years without learning the difference between quality and pretense. But they had no idea who was really paying for their champagne. Inside, crystal chandeliers worth $25,000 each cast light over 350 of Connecticut's finest. The guest list read like a who's who of old money, families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. And there was Victoria, my daughter, floating through the crowd in her $32,000 Vera Wang gown. She saw me enter. Our eyes met across the room. She looked away. A wedding planner with a clipboard and a headset approached me. You must be... She checked her list. Table 18? Table 18. By the kitchen door, where the catering staff rushed back and forth with trays. Where the sound system had a slight buzz. Where families seat the relatives they have to invite but don't want to explain. That's me, I said, and Victoria was at table 1, center of the room, spotlight position, with her new family, the Whitmores. Preston Whitmore III was her husband-to-be. Preston Whitmore Sr. owned half the commercial real estate in Fairfield County. They had money that was old when my grandfather was still farming in Ohio. I took my seat and watched my daughter work the room. She moved differently now, practiced, like she'd been born to this. When guests asked about her family, she'd point toward table 1 and smile. My father's right over there, she'd say, gesturing toward a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a custom tuxedo. Richard Morrison. I'd never seen him before in my life. Meanwhile, my table filled with +1s and distant cousins. Nice people, but not the kind who get mentioned in the Connecticut Society pages. We made small talk about the weather and the beautiful venue. Nobody asked what I did for work. Probably for the best. 26 years of raising that girl. 26 years of scraped knees and bedtime stories and dance recitals. I'd missed exactly 3 of her birthdays, all because of emergency calls. Burst pipes don't wait for convenient times, but I always made it up to her. Always. I paid for her private school when her grades suffered in public. $14,000 a year for Fairview Academy. I paid for her college, Yale no less. $68,000 a year for 4 years. I paid for her apartment in Manhattan when she couldn't find work after graduation. $3,000 a month for 2 years. And now I was paying for this wedding. Every detail. The venue rental, $180,000. The catering, $85,000. The flowers, $28,000. The string quartet from the New York Philharmonic, $15,000. The photographer, $12,000. The 7-tier cake, $8,500. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake in her eagerness to fit in with Greenwich society. She'd forgotten to read the fine print on her dream wedding. The cocktail hour stretched on, and the distance between my table and hers felt like miles. I watched Victoria pose for photos with the Whitmores, playing the role of the grateful daughter they'd saved from obscurity. Every smile was a knife twist. If I stayed silent tonight, I'd lose more than money. I'd lose my self-respect. Let me tell you what 30 years of building Hayes Plumbing and Property Solutions really meant. Started in 1994 with a used van and a toolbox. Worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week for the first 5 years. Lived on peanut butter sandwiches and determination. But I didn't just fix pipes. I paid attention. I listened when customers talked about their problems. I learned that the lawyer with the leaking faucet was selling his building. I bought it. Fixed it up myself, rented it out, bought another, then another. 23 locations now. Hayes Plumbing and Property Solutions. We handle everything from residential service calls to commercial building management. Last year's revenue, $8.9 million. Net worth, certified by my CPA, same figure. Victoria knew none of this. In her mind, I was still the guy who came home with dirty hands and grease under his fingernails. The guy who embarrassed her at parent-teacher conferences because I wore work clothes. The guy who wasn't sophisticated enough for her Yale friends. She had no idea that her simple plumber dad owned more property than half the people in this room, but staying quiet meant accepting that she was ashamed of everything I'd worked for. It meant watching her build a marriage on lies. It meant teaching her that family loyalty was negotiable based on social status. The consequences would ripple through our family for generations. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the folded papers I'd brought. Bank statements showing the $500,000 transfer to cover wedding expenses. Contracts with my signature as the sole financial guarantor. Email threads with wedding planner Melissa Chen. 23 messages over 4 months, all addressed to Mr. Hayes and copied to Victoria. She'd been copied on every email. She knew exactly who was paying for this fairy tale. The guest list included a reporter from Greenwich Social Register, here to cover the wedding of the season. Whatever happened tonight would be documented, photographed, possibly live-streamed to their social media followers. The Whitmores loved publicity, as long as it was the right kind. My attorney, Richard Paulson, sat 3 tables away. We'd worked together for 15 years. He'd flown up from Florida just for tonight, carrying a briefcase with documents that could change everything. I'd asked him to be here, just in case. He thought I was being paranoid. "Jim," he'd said over the phone, "she's your daughter. She loves you. This is just wedding stress." But Richard had never had to sit at table 18 while his daughter introduced strangers as family. Catherine Brooks, the venue manager, kept glancing my way. She knew who really signed the checks. When vendors had problems, they called me, not the Whitmores. I was the client. I held the contracts. I had the authority to make decisions. The Whitmores thought their reputation and social connections made them untouchable. They'd never dealt with someone who built their power from the ground up, one satisfied customer at a time. They understood inherited wealth, not earned respect. If I challenged Victoria tonight, I'd be forcing her to choose between her new family and her real one, between the lies she'd constructed and the truth she was running from, between the sophisticated life she wanted and the working-class values that built it. But if I didn't challenge her, I'd be teaching her that love without respect was enough, that she could take everything I'd given her and give nothing back, that being ashamed of your family was acceptable as long as you did it politely. The cost wouldn't just be financial, it would be spiritual. I'd raised a daughter who thought character was something you could buy and sell, who believed that loving someone meant never having to say, "You're grateful." My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Daddy, please don't mention the plumbing business tonight. This is important to me." 30 years of sacrifice reduced to an embarrassment to be managed. I looked around the room, at the crystal and the gold and the flowers that cost more than most people's annual salary, at the guests who'd never worked with their hands or worried about making payroll, at my daughter, who'd learned to be ashamed of the very qualities that made all this possible. The decision crystallized in that moment, because some lessons can only be taught the hard way. 7:15. The cocktail hour hit full swing, and the social ecosystem revealed itself in all its polished cruelty. 3 guests approached my table within the first hour. All had worked with Hayes Plumbing over the years. Margaret Henderson, whose flooded basement I'd personally fixed last winter. Dr. James Walsh, whose medical building we'd renovated in 2019. Sarah Chen, whose restaurant's plumbing emergency I'd handled on Christmas Eve, 2022. Jim Hayes! Margaret's face lit up. I didn't expect to see you here. Father of the bride, I said simply. Her expression shifted. Confusion, then understanding, then something approaching sympathy. Oh my. Victoria never mentioned. She keeps her private life private, I said. But Margaret's voice had carried. Nearby conversations paused. Eyes turned our way. The whispers started immediately. That's the plumber. Victoria's father? I thought he was... Oh, didn't she say her father passed away? Within minutes, the story spread through the crowd, like spilled wine through white linen. I watched faces change as the news traveled. Surprise. Awkwardness. A few looked genuinely sorry for me. Most just looked uncomfortable, like they'd stumbled into a family drama they didn't understand. Preston Whitmore Sr. noticed the commotion. 72 years old, silver-haired, wearing a bespoke suit that probably cost $4,000. He approached my table with the confident stride of a man who'd never been denied anything. You must be Jim, he said, extending a manicured hand. Preston Whitmore. Victoria's told us so much about you. Polite lie. Victoria had told them nothing. Have we met before? He continued. You look familiar. I fixed your kitchen pipes last March, I said. Emergency call, Sunday morning. You were hosting a charity brunch. His smile flickered, just for a second, then returned, more forced this time. Ah, yes, well, you do excellent work. Thank you. Victoria's fortunate to have such a practical father. Practical. Not successful. Not accomplished. Practical. Like a tool you keep in the garage. He patted my shoulder, a gesture that managed to be both condescending and dismissive, and moved away. But the damage was done. The entire room now knew that the bride's father was the help. I watched Victoria's reaction from across the room. She'd seen the conversation, seen the whispers. Her face flushed red, then went pale. She said something sharp to Preston III, who immediately looked in my direction. Not friendly curiosity, assessment, like he was calculating whether I posed a threat to his perfect evening. The string quartet played Pachelbel's Canon. Servers circulated with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spent on groceries in a month. The flowers, white orchids flown in from Hawaii, filled the air with expensive perfume. But the mood had shifted. What started as elegant anticipation now carried an undercurrent of tension. Guests kept glancing between my corner table and Victoria's center stage position. The math didn't add up, and everyone knew it. Catherine Brooks, the venue manager, appeared at my elbow. Mr. Hayes, is everything all right? Professional concern. She'd been dealing with me for months during the planning process. She knew which signature appeared on the contracts. Everything's perfect, Catherine. If you need anything at all, please let me know immediately. She emphasized immediately in a way that suggested she understood the delicate dynamics at play. Catherine had worked events for Greenwich Society long enough to recognize when social hierarchies were about to collapse. Preston III made his way over to me. 28 years old, Harvard MBA, trust fund baby who'd never earned a callus in his life. His handshake was weak, the grip of someone who'd never held anything heavier than a golf club. Sir, he said, I want to thank you for raising such an incredible woman. She is incredible, I agreed. Victoria mentioned that you've had some challenges over the years. Challenges, like working for a living, was a character flaw. We all have challenges, I said, and of course, but I want you to know that she'll never have to worry about money again. The Whitmore family takes care of our own. Our own. Like Victoria had been adopted out of poverty instead of choosing to abandon her family. That's generous of you, I said. Family is everything to us, blood or otherwise. Blood or otherwise. The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria might carry their name now, but she'd never really be one of them. She'd always be the girl they rescued from working-class obscurity. Preston III smiled, the kind of smile sharks probably wore before feeding, and returned to his table. But I noticed something he'd missed in his eagerness to establish dominance. The attorney I'd hired was already walking toward the stage. Victoria caught my eye across the room. For just a moment, our gazes locked. I saw fear there. Not the usual social anxiety that plagued her in high-pressure situations. Real fear, the kind that comes when you realize your carefully constructed world might be about to crumble. She'd built this new life on lies and borrowed sophistication. She'd traded her family's love for social acceptance. She'd chosen status over substance. But she'd forgotten the most important rule of any transaction: always know who holds the real power. And tonight, she was about to learn that power isn't inherited. It's earned. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Victoria. Final payment confirmation required by 9 p.m. Catherine Brooks, venue manager. I glanced at my watch. 7:45. The ceremony would start in 15 minutes. Victoria's perfect timeline, executed with military precision. But timelines can change quickly when you're the one holding the checkbook. Richard Paulson caught my eye from across the room and tapped his briefcase. Inside that leather case sat documents that could unravel this entire evening in minutes. Contracts, bank statements, emails, the paper trail that proved exactly who was making this fairy tale possible. Richard had initially questioned my decision to bring legal documentation to my daughter's wedding. "It seems excessive, Jim." "It's insurance," I told him. Now I was beginning to think I might need that insurance after all. Catherine Brooks approached my table again. This time, she wasn't alone. Two of her assistant managers flanked her, young professionals in dark suits with earpieces and clipboards. "Mr. Hayes," Catherine said quietly, "could we speak privately for a moment?" We stepped to the side of the room, away from the crowd. "Sir, we've had some inquiries about the final payment schedule." "What kind of inquiries?" "The catering team needs confirmation on the outstanding balance. $340,000. The contract specified payment before service begins." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The Hayes Property Solutions business account showed a balance that would make most people dizzy. But more importantly, it showed the pending transfer to Ashford Estate Catering, scheduled for 9:15 p.m. Scheduled, not completed. "Is there a problem with the payment?" Catherine asked. "No problem at all," I said, "as long as the service meets the standards we agreed upon." Catherine's expression shifted slightly. After 15 years in the hospitality business, she'd developed an instinct for when clients were about to become difficult. But she'd also learned to recognize real authority when she saw it. "Of course, sir, everything will be perfect." "I'm counting on it." As she returned to her team, but I noticed how they continued to watch me, not with the casual attention they'd give a guest's father, with the focused concern they'd give their actual client, because they understood something the Whitmores hadn't figured out yet. In business, signatures matter more than surnames. My phone rang. Unknown number with a Connecticut area code. "Mr. Hayes, this is David Chen from Fairfield County Social Register. We're covering the wedding tonight." "I'm not interested in interviews." "Actually, sir, I was calling about the catering situation. I understand there's been some confusion about the payment structure." Word traveled fast in small communities. Someone had talked. "No confusion," I said. "Everything's exactly as it should be." "Will the reception proceed as scheduled?" Interesting question. David Chen wasn't calling about social coverage. He was calling because someone had tipped him off that tonight's wedding of the season might not go according to plan. "You'll have to wait and see," I said, and hung up. Preston Whitmore Sr. was holding court near the bar, regaling guests with stories about his latest yacht purchase. $2 million for something he'd use 6 weekends a year. But he was careful to speak loudly enough that everyone could hear about his casual relationship with money. Old money loves an audience almost as much as it loves itself. But old money also makes assumptions. They assume that because they've always had wealth, they understand how wealth works. They assume that social connections are the same as business relationships. They assume that a working-class man in a borrowed tuxedo poses no real threat to their carefully ordered world. Tonight, they were about to learn the difference between having money and controlling it. The ceremony was about to begin. Victoria's moment of triumph. The culmination of months of planning and a lifetime of social climbing. But every perfect moment depends on someone keeping the lights on. And I was the one holding the switch. 8:45 p.m. Dinner service was in full swing, and the mood had shifted from cocktail tension to celebration. The ceremony had been flawless. Victoria radiant in her Vera Wang gown, Preston III playing his part with practiced perfection. Even I had to admit they looked good together. But the real test was about to begin. Preston Whitmore Sr. stood to give his toast. The room quieted, as 350 guests turned their attention to the head table. Crystal glasses caught the light from those $25,000 chandeliers. The moment felt suspended, perfect, like a photograph from a society magazine. Friends, family, and honored guests, Preston Sr. began, his voice carrying the authority of old money and older privilege. Tonight we celebrate not just the union of two young people, but the joining of two families. Polite applause, knowing smiles. Everyone understood their role in this performance. Victoria, he continued, turning toward my daughter, you have brought such joy to our family. Your grace, your intelligence, your character. These are the qualities that make us proud to call you our daughter. Our daughter. The phrase hit like a physical blow. But I especially want to thank the man who raised you to be the remarkable woman you are today. Preston Sr. raised his glass and looked directly at Richard Morrison, the distinguished stranger sitting at the head table. To Victoria's father, a man who embodies everything we admire about integrity and dignity. The room erupted in applause. 350 people rose to their feet, glasses raised toward a man who had never changed my daughter's diaper, never stayed up all night when she had a fever, never sacrificed a single thing for her happiness. Victoria beamed, her smile radiant and grateful. She raised her own glass toward Morrison, mouthing, I love you, Daddy, for all to see, 26 years of fatherhood erased with a single toast. But Preston Sr. wasn't finished. Victoria often tells us how fortunate she is to have been raised by such a principled man, how his guidance shaped her into someone who understands the importance of family, loyalty, and doing what's right. His voice carried across the room with perfect projection. In a world where so many young people lack proper role models, Victoria had the blessing of a father who taught her the difference between class and mere wealth. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Richard Morrison, Preston Sr. continued, gesturing grandly toward the impostor, thank you for giving us the gift of your daughter. Tonight, we officially welcome her into the Whitmore family, knowing that the values you instilled in her will guide her for the rest of her life. The applause was thunderous. I watched as guest after guest turned toward Morrison, nodding approval, some wiping away tears at the touching tribute to fatherly love. No one looked at me. I sat at table 18, invisible in my borrowed tuxedo, watching my daughter accept praise for values I had taught her while crediting a man she'd probably met 6 months ago. But then something interesting happened. Margaret Henderson, who'd spoken to me earlier, stood frozen with her glass halfway to her lips. Dr. Walsh looked confused, glancing between Morrison and my corner table. Sarah Chen had stopped applauding entirely and was staring directly at me with an expression of growing outrage. They remembered our conversation. They knew who the real father was, and they weren't the only ones. Catherine Brooks stood near the kitchen entrance, her professional smile strained. She held her phone in one hand, probably checking on the final payment that still hadn't been processed. Her assistant managers flanked her, all three watching my table with barely concealed anxiety. The catering staff had paused their service to listen to the toast, but I noticed how their supervisor kept glancing at his watch. 9 p.m., final payment deadline. They'd been told that service might be interrupted if certain conditions weren't met. Preston Sr. concluded his toast with a flourish. To Victoria and Preston, may their marriage be as blessed as the family that raised her. The room exploded in celebration. Guests surged toward Morrison to offer congratulations. Victoria hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face, whether from joy or relief I couldn't tell. But I noticed something else. David Chen from the Fairfield County Social Register stood near the exit with a photographer, both watching the scene with the intense focus of journalists who sensed a bigger story developing. Chen's phone was already out, recording everything. Richard Paulson had positioned himself near the stage, briefcase in hand. When our eyes met across the room, he nodded once. Ready. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Brooks. Sir, we need to speak immediately. Payment issues. I stood up from table 18. The room was still celebrating, glasses raised, people laughing and congratulating each other on witnessing such a touching family moment. But a few guests noticed my movement. Margaret Henderson watched me with growing understanding. Dr. Walsh had gone pale, realizing what was about to happen. I walked slowly toward the stage where Preston Sr. still stood, basking in applause. Each step felt deliberate, final. the point of no return. Victoria saw me coming. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and in that instant I saw her recognize something in my expression that she'd never seen before. Not disappointment, not hurt, resolution. Preston III stepped protectively closer to his new wife. Preston Sr. continued accepting congratulations, oblivious to the shift in energy around him. But Catherine Brooks was already moving, her team spreading out around the room's perimeter. The catering staff had quietly stopped serving. David Chen raised his camera, because sometimes the truth has to be spoken loudly enough that everyone can hear it, even the people who don't want to listen. I reached the edge of the stage area. Preston Sr. finally noticed my approach, his celebration smile faltering slightly. He probably thought I was coming to thank him for his gracious words about Morrison. He had no idea I was coming to introduce myself. I reached for the microphone. "Excuse me," I said. The room didn't quiet immediately. Conversations continued, guests still caught up in the emotional high of Preston Sr.'s toast. But those closest to the stage began to notice something unusual. A man in an ill-fitting tuxedo approaching the microphone that had just been used to honor someone else entirely. Preston Sr.'s expression shifted from confusion to alarm. "Sir, I'm not sure this is—" "My name is Jim Hayes," I said, my voice carrying across the room through the sound system, "and I'm Victoria's father." The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. 350 people turned to stare at the man who'd just disrupted the perfect evening. Victoria went white. Preston III stepped forward, probably planning to have me escorted out, but I held up my hand. "For the past 30 minutes, you've been celebrating the wonderful father who raised my daughter." I gestured toward Richard Morrison, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. That man has never met Victoria before tonight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I heard someone say, "Oh my God," from the back of the room. "Preston," I continued, looking directly at Whitmore Sr., "I appreciate your kind words about integrity and values, but you directed them at the wrong person." Richard Paulson appeared at my side, briefcase open. He handed me a folder of documents, bank statements, contracts, email printouts, evidence. "This is the contract for tonight's venue," I said, holding up the papers. "Signed by James Hayes. That's me. This is the catering agreement for $85,000. Also signed by James Hayes. The florist contract for $28,000. The musician contract for $15,000. Every single vendor agreement for this evening." I could see faces in the crowd shifting from confusion to understanding. Margaret Henderson was nodding grimly. Dr. Walsh looked sick. "The total cost of this wedding is $500,000. Every penny paid by Hayes Property Solutions. That's my company." Victoria found her voice. "Daddy, please don't—" "Don't what?" I asked, my tone still calm but carrying more edge now. "Don't tell the truth? Don't embarrass you? Don't exist?" Preston Sr. stepped forward. "Now see here, you can't just—" "I can't what? Pay for my daughter's wedding? Because that's exactly what I did." I held up my phone, showing the banking app. "This is the business account for Hayes Property Solutions. Current balance, $12.3 million. Tonight's wedding expenses, transferred in full." The room was dead silent now. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. "Hayes Property Solutions," I continued, "is a company I built over 30 years. We started with residential plumbing and grew into commercial property management. 23 locations. $8.9 million in annual revenue. Not bad for a simple plumber." Catherine Brooks approached the stage, flanked by her assistant managers. "Mr. Hayes," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "we need to discuss the final payment authorization." Perfect timing. "Of course, Catherine. You need the final $340,000 before you can complete tonight's service." Preston Sr. looked confused. "What final payment? Everything was arranged. Everything was arranged by me," I said. "Through my attorney, my accountant, and my business manager. The Whitmore family has no financial involvement in tonight's celebration." I turned back to the crowd, many of whom were now pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming the most dramatic moment in Greenwich social history. For 6 months, Victoria asked me not to mention my work at wedding events. She was embarrassed that her father was just a plumber. She wanted to fit in with her new family's social circle. I understood that. I wanted her to be happy. Victoria's tears were flowing freely now. but not tears of joy. But tonight, she went one step further. She told you all that her father was dead. She introduced a complete stranger as the man who raised her. She erased 26 years of our relationship to maintain her social status. The crowd was restless now. Whispered conversations, shocked expressions, phones recording everything. "Preston," I said, addressing Whitmore Sr. directly, "you spoke beautifully about family loyalty and doing what's right. You praised the values that shaped Victoria into the woman she is today, but you gave credit to the wrong man." I held up a printed email thread. These are communications between Victoria and wedding planner Melissa Chen. 23 emails over 4 months. Victoria was copied on every message. She knew exactly who was funding her dream wedding. David Chen from the Social Register was recording everything, his photographer capturing the stunned expressions around the room. "So now we come to the final payment," I said, addressing Catherine Brooks, but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. $340,000 to complete tonight's service. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check. The final payment Catherine needed. The check that would keep the reception running smoothly. The room held its breath. "Catherine, as the client whose signature appears on every contract, I have a question. Does this venue provide service to people who are ashamed of their families?" Catherine looked trapped. "Sir, because I'm not interested in funding a celebration of my own humiliation." I looked at the check in my hands. $340,000. Made out to Ashford Estate Catering, signed and ready. Then I tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper carried across the silent room like a gunshot. "The contracts are void," I announced. "No final payment means no continued service. I believe that's standard hospitality industry practice." Victoria screamed, not a cry of surprise, a full-throated scream of panic and rage. "You can't do this!" she shouted. "This is my wedding." "Yes," I said calmly. "It was." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted. Victoria launched herself toward the stage, her $32,000 gown trailing behind her like a silk accusation. "Daddy, you can't! Please, there has to be another way." But there wasn't another way. That's what she'd never understood about business. When you make certain choices, you eliminate certain options. When you burn bridges, you can't walk back across them. Preston III grabbed my arm. "You're insane. You can't destroy my wife's wedding over some petty grudge." "It's not a grudge," I said, shaking off his grip. "It's a lesson in consequences." Catherine Brooks was already on her radio, speaking rapid-fire instructions to her team. "Attention all stations. Service suspension in effect immediately. Secure all payments. Contact vendor supervisors." The catering staff began clearing tables with professional efficiency. Servers collected wine glasses from startled guests. The string quartet stopped mid-piece, instruments lowering in confusion. Preston Sr.'s face had gone purple. "This is outrageous. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you're worth." "On what grounds?" Richard Paulson stepped forward, briefcase still open. "My client fulfilled his contractual obligations. He paid $260,000 up front. The final payment was contingent on satisfactory service completion." "The service was satisfactory, was it?" I asked. "Because part of the service I paid for was treating my family with respect. That didn't happen, Dr. Ahoy." Walsh approached the stage, his face grim. "Jim, I owe you an apology. I should have said something earlier." "No apology needed, James. You're not responsible for my daughter's choices." But other guests were reacting differently. I could hear fragments of heated conversations. Despicable behavior. How could she do that to her own father? The Whitmores should have known. $500,000. David Chen from the Social Register was interviewing guests, his photographer capturing every moment of the collapse. This wouldn't just be local gossip. It would be documented, published, permanent. Victoria collapsed into a chair, her perfect wedding dress pooling around her like spilled champagne. 26 years, she sobbed. "You're throwing away 26 years over one night." "I'm not throwing anything away," I said. "You already did that when you told 350 people I was dead." The venue was emptying rapidly now. Guests gathered their belongings and headed for the exits, some stopping to offer quiet words of support, others clearly eager to escape the family drama. The old money crowd particularly seemed uncomfortable with such raw displays of emotion. Preston Whitmore Sr. made one final attempt at control. "Hayes, let's be reasonable. Name your price. Whatever you want. money, property, business connections. We can work this out. You think this is about money? Everything's about money. That's where you're wrong. I folded the torn check pieces and put them in my pocket. This is about something you can't buy. Respect. Catherine Brooks approached me one last time. Mr. Hayes, for the record, your account shows the venue rental and initial catering payments were processed successfully. The incomplete final payment voids the extended service agreement, but the facility usage through 10 p.m. remains valid. Professional to the end. Catherine understood contracts. Thank you, Catherine. You and your staff have been excellent. The photographer finished packing his equipment. The string quartet loaded their instruments. Within 30 minutes, the wedding reception had transformed from elegant celebration to empty ballroom. Victoria sat alone at table 1. Her husband and new in-laws huddled in urgent conversation near the exit. Preston III kept glancing at his wife with something that looked like disappointment, maybe even disgust. This wasn't the sophisticated family he'd thought he was marrying into. Richard Morrison, the fake father, had slipped out early, probably recognizing that his role in the evening's deception wouldn't reflect well on his reputation. Victoria, I said, approaching her table. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Are you happy now? You've ruined everything. I didn't ruin anything, I said quietly. I just stopped paying for it. She wiped her nose with a cloth napkin that probably cost more than most people's dinner. 30 years building your precious business, and you destroy it all in one night. My business will be fine. It's built on real relationships with real people who value honest work. But your marriage... I glanced toward the Whitmores, who were still in heated discussion. That might be a different story. Preston III was gesturing angrily at his father, his voice carrying across the now empty ballroom. You said you'd handled the financial arrangements. You said everything was covered. We assumed, Preston Sr. began. You assumed wrong, Preston III snapped. Do you have any idea how this looks? My wife's father just publicly humiliated our entire family. Victoria flinched at the word humiliated. The social register reporter got everything, Preston III continued. Photos, quotes, financial details. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Greenwich will know we hosted a wedding we couldn't afford to pay for. That was the real wound. Not that Victoria had lied about her family. Rich people lie about inconvenient relatives all the time. The problem was that the lie had been exposed publicly, dramatically, with evidence. In their world, image was everything, and their image was now permanently stained. Richard Paulson packed his briefcase. Jim, legally speaking, you're completely protected. All contracts were properly executed. The payment structure was clearly defined. No court would find fault with your actions. Thanks, Richard. But personally speaking, that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most devastating. Maybe both. Victoria stood slowly, her dress rustling in the empty ballroom. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wait for me to come home from work, ready to tell me about her day. I loved you, she said. Despite everything, I loved you. Past tense? You just destroyed my marriage before it even started. No, Victoria. You did that when you chose shame over family. I just made the consequences visible. The Whitmores finished their conference and approached us. Preston III's face was cold, calculating. The romantic groom had been replaced by a businessman assessing losses. Victoria, he said, we need to discuss our options. What options? Damage control, media management, financial restructuring. He glanced at me dismissively. This situation is manageable, but it will require significant adjustments to our original plans. Even now, he was speaking in corporate euphemisms. Their marriage wasn't wounded, it required adjustments. Their humiliation wasn't devastating, it was manageable. Victoria looked between her husband and her father. For the first time all evening, she seemed to see both men clearly. Preston III represented everything she'd thought she wanted. Status, security, acceptance into a world where appearance mattered more than substance. I represented everything she'd been trying to escape. Working-class origins, earned rather than inherited wealth, values that couldn't be bought or borrowed. I need to think, she said. Think quickly, Preston III replied. The longer this story circulates, the harder it becomes to contain. He wasn't asking if she was okay. He wasn't apologizing for his family's role in the deception. He was managing a public relations crisis. Catherine Brooks appeared one final time. Mr. Hayes, the venue is secured. Your remaining items will be stored safely overnight. Thank you, Catherine, for what it's worth, she said quietly. In 20 years of managing events, I've never seen someone handle dignity under pressure quite like you did tonight. As we prepared to leave, Victoria called out one last time, Daddy, will you ever forgive me? I stopped at the ballroom entrance and looked back at my daughter, standing alone in her wedding dress, amid the empty tables and cold chandeliers. Victoria, forgiveness isn't something you ask for once and receive forever. It's something you earn every day through your choices. What does that mean? It means the next move is yours. The story broke in the Fairfield County Social Register Sunday morning. David Chen's article ran with the headline, Wedding of the Season Ends in Financial Drama as Bride's Father Cancels Payment. The piece included photos from the reception, quotes from unnamed guests, and a detailed breakdown of the evening's costs. By noon, it had been shared across every social media platform in Connecticut. By evening, it had gone national. Victoria called me at 7 a.m., her voice hoarse from crying. It's everywhere, Daddy. Everyone's talking about it. What are people saying? Some are calling you a hero. Others are saying you're vindictive and cruel. She paused. The Whitmores aren't talking to me. What about Preston? He's evaluating our situation. His words. Evaluating. Like she was a business investment that had suddenly become risky. Victoria, what did you expect? You built your marriage on lies. Lies have consequences. I know that now. By Monday morning, the financial implications became clear. The Ashford estate was pursuing the Whitmore family for the unpaid balance. Vendors who had extended credit based on the family's reputation were demanding immediate payment. The wedding industry gossip network had spread the story to every planner, caterer, and venue manager in the tri-state area. Preston Whitmore Sr. called me directly Tuesday afternoon. Hayes, we need to settle this like gentlemen. I thought we already did. This publicity is damaging both our families. My business relationships are suffering. My son's marriage is under strain. That's unfortunate. I'm prepared to offer compensation for the financial inconvenience you experienced. He still didn't understand. After everything that had happened, he thought this was about money. Preston, you can't buy your way out of this. Your family participated in erasing me from my daughter's life. Money won't fix that. Then what do you want? I want Victoria to decide who she really is, and I want you to stay out of that decision. The social consequences rippled through Greenwich society like aftershocks from an earthquake. The Whitmores found themselves disinvited from several upcoming events. Their charity board positions were quietly restructured. The family patriarch's reputation for shrewd business dealings was tainted by his failure to understand the basic terms of his son's wedding. But the most significant consequence was within Victoria's marriage itself. Preston III, it turned out, had married Victoria partly because his family viewed her as a project. A beautiful girl from modest circumstances who could be molded into proper society wife. The discovery that her circumstances weren't modest at all, and that she'd been willing to lie about her family to gain acceptance, undermined everything he thought he knew about her. Margaret Henderson stopped by my office Thursday morning. Jim, I owe you an apology. When I saw you at that wedding, I should have spoken up immediately. You don't owe me anything, Margaret. Yes, I do. We all do. Everyone who worked with you over the years, who knew what kind of man you were, and who stayed silent while they tried to erase you. She wasn't the only one. Dr. Walsh sent a letter. Sarah Chen called personally. Customers who had heard the story reached out to express support. The working-class community that had always known my worth was rallying around the principle I'd defended. But the most interesting response came from unexpected sources. 3 business owners contacted Hayes Property Solutions about potential partnerships. A commercial real estate developer wanted to discuss joint ventures. A regional bank requested a meeting about expanding our property management services. The publicity that was supposed to embarrass me had actually enhanced my professional reputation. In the business world, standing up for your principles, even at significant personal cost, was seen as a strength, not a weakness. Victoria and Preston III attended marriage counseling for 2 weeks before he filed for annulment. His grounds were fraudulent misrepresentation of family background and financial status. Legal documents that would become part of the public record, ensuring that Victoria's deception followed her forever. She moved back to her Manhattan apartment, the one I'd been paying for throughout her marriage. For the first time in months, she was truly alone with the consequences of her choices. Friday evening, she called again. The annulment papers came through today. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Really? Victoria, I never wanted your marriage to fail. I wanted it to be built on truth. Well, now I have nothing. No husband, no family, no reputation. You have the same thing you've always had, the choice to be who you really are instead of who you think people want you to be. And if I make that choice, if I stop being ashamed of where I came from, then maybe we can start rebuilding what we lost. It's too late for that. It's only too late when one of us stops breathing. Until then, there's always tomorrow. The line went quiet for a long moment. I'll think about it, she finally said. That's all I've ever asked for. 6 weeks later, Victoria knocked on my office door. Not my home. My office. Hayes Property Solutions, Building A, Suite 101. The headquarters of the business empire she'd been too ashamed to acknowledge. She looked different, simpler. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail instead of an elaborate updo. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes. Most importantly, her expression had changed. The artificial sophistication was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine uncertainty. Hi, Daddy. Hello, Victoria. Can we talk? I gestured to the chair across from my desk. The same desk where I'd planned her wedding payments 6 months earlier. The same chair where she'd sat as a teenager, complaining about homework while I finished paperwork. How are you doing? I asked. Honestly, terrible. The annulment made the papers. I lost my job at the gallery. Too much negative publicity. Most of my friends from the Whitmore Circle won't return my calls. I'm sorry to hear that. But also relieved. Do you know how exhausting it is to pretend to be someone else every day? To monitor every word, every gesture, every opinion to make sure it fits the image you're supposed to project? I waited. She needed to say this in her own words at her own pace. I've been thinking about what you said, about earning forgiveness through daily choices. She looked around my office, taking in the awards on the walls, the photos of completed projects, the evidence of 3 decades of honest work. I want to make different choices now. What kind of choices? I want to work, real work, not managing social events or picking out flowers for charity galas. I want to learn the business that built everything I took for granted. I studied her face, looking for signs of performance or manipulation, but what I saw was exhaustion mixed with determination, the look of someone who'd hit bottom and decided to climb back up instead of staying there. The business isn't glamorous, Victoria. It's early mornings and difficult customers and problems that don't have elegant solutions. I know. I've been reading about property management, about commercial leasing, about building maintenance. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a chance to prove I can contribute something real. What about your trust fund lifestyle? Your Manhattan apartment? I gave up the apartment. I'm staying at an extended stay hotel until I can afford something modest. She managed a weak smile. Turns out when your father cuts off your funding and your husband annuls your marriage, you learn about budgets pretty quickly. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd thought was permanently lost. Pride in my daughter. There's a junior position open in our residential services division, customer service, some basic project coordination. It pays $38,000 a year. That's more than I've ever earned in my life. It's also more than most people your age earn without experience. But you'd be starting at the bottom, reporting to managers who are younger than you, dealing with customers who might recognize you from the newspaper coverage. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't about redemption or making up for past mistakes. This is about whether you genuinely want to build something worthwhile, or whether you're just looking for another form of security. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said I wanted security. But security based on pretense isn't really security at all. It's just delayed disappointment. She met my eyes directly. I want to build something real, even if it's small, even if it takes years. The job starts Monday, 8 a.m. Dress code is business casual, not country club casual. I'll be there. As she stood to leave, Victoria paused at the door. Daddy, thank you. For the job? For teaching me that self-respect isn't something you can inherit or marry into. It's something you have to earn. Now you're starting to understand what I've been trying to tell you your whole life. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her when she was 16, and walked out to begin the hardest work she'd ever done, becoming someone she could be proud of. If you've stayed with me this long, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And have you ever had to choose between fitting in and staying true to your family? Leave a comment below, and remember, real class isn't about your zip code or your bank account. It's about keeping your word and honoring the people who helped you become who you are. Because sometimes the most important lessons cost the most to teach.